what we need to do differently, what habits we need to change, what lifestyle patterns, and where do we go to find the wisdom and the guidance for this? A lot of times we look inward. We try to make up our own mind, or we go to self-help books. You know, self-help books is one of the largest and fastest growing areas of literature. And of course, there's the great wealth of wisdom that's found on the internet. If you want to know anything from what diet to use this year, or how to do plumbing, or how to fix your behavioral problems in your children, whatever it is, you can find it on the internet. But I would submit to you today that there's really only one place to go for true and lasting change in our lives, for the foundation of our life, and that is Jesus Christ, who is the only true guiding light in life. And if that's true in your life, you could probably go ahead and leave, because that's what the entire sermon is about. But I'm watching you. John 8:12 says this. Jesus is talking. He says, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." The author of Hebrews was a profound writer. We really don't know if it was a male or a female. Some have thought it might have been Priscilla and Aquila together who wrote this book, but we don't know. We do know that it has some of the best advice in the Bible. And I want to look with you at Hebrews 12:1 and 3. And there are four things I want to compare this morning and talk about in reference to the story also of the wise men. The first thing that the author of Hebrews tells us is that to be this race called life, that we are to run it with perseverance, that we are to persevere with whatever comes our way in life. I don't know about you, but in my 58 years and 11 months, I have not found life to be easy. And yet I live in an affluent area of the world. I have all that I need. I have heat. I have food to eat. I have family and friends. And yet life is still not easy. But no one ever really said that it was going to be easy. And I have found in my experience that it is almost always our own sin that entangles us. That's what exactly the author of Hebrews is telling us. It is our own sin that drags us off to the side, that takes us down the wrong path, that leads us astray, that brings us into relationships that entangle us, that brings us into problems at work, at school, at play, wherever it is. It is almost always our own decisions when we follow our own path and our own wisdom instead of God's. Let me give you one simple example. I loved Joe's sermon last week that talked about hindsight, because I have found that I can look back at my life now with clarity and see things and choices that I made that were absolutely the wrong choices, that I followed my own leading and not God's. Let me give you one example. I graduated from high school in 1972. And I went on to college. I felt God's call on my life, which is a whole nother sermon. But I went on to college. I studied religion and graduated in 1976, right straight through. I was 22 years old, and I had to make a decision about where to go to seminary. I looked at lots of different seminaries and narrowed it down to two. One was in the Midwest and was recommended to me by my own pastor who had attended there, and he called me in and we had a long discussion, and he said, "Cheryl, this is the school you should choose. It is theologically conservative like you, and it's just your grandmother," my grandmother was dead, by the way, "your grandmother would have been so pleased to have you go there." I'm not sure how he knew that, but anyway. The other seminary was on the West Coast. It was in California, to be precise. It was just a few miles from the beach. It was warm weather. It was a glamorous, exciting area. I was 22 years old. Which do you think I chose? California, here I come. Absolutely. I didn't even pray about it. I didn't even seek God's wisdom or guidance. I listened to my pastor, and I listened to my 22-year-old desires, and I went to California. And now looking back on it, it was one of the biggest mistakes I made in life. Not that I didn't learn things, not that I didn't progress and do things, but it was so culturally different. It was just, for a Midwesterner, it was California in the 70s. Think about that. It was just crazy. A few blocks up from us, the year or so before, Patty Hearst had been kidnapped right in that. I was in Berkeley. Did I say that? I was in Berkeley, California, by the way. And a few blocks below us was Telegraph Avenue, where people were shot almost every day of the week. It was so eye-opening. It was a cultural mismatch. It was a theological mismatch. It was one of the most liberal schools in American Baptist. It was American Baptist, but you would have never known it, not by my standards, not by Midwestern American Baptist standards. And to top it all off, the theology professor, the chair of theology, was vacant at that time. And so my theology class, I was assigned to go over to the Franciscan seminary and have theology from a Franciscan professor, a priest. Boy, if that wasn't a challenge to have a Baptist learning theology from a Franciscan priest. And then to even add more to the problems, the school was in the midst of just a knockdown, drag-out conflict. The southern campus was being combined with the northern campus, and the students were constantly fighting, and the professors that they brought in were constantly fighting with the others. And I struggled, and I struggled, and I did it for 2 years, and then I finally quit. It was a 3-year program, by the way. I quit seminary with 1 year left to go. I came back home, and it took me years, literally years, to finish that 3rd year of seminary because of all the conflict and all the problems that I saw in that Christian school. I had made my own path, my own decision, and it was the wrong one. You know, we see that in life sometimes. We make our own problems for ourselves by not following God's wisdom and God's guidance. The wise men, however, in Matthew, persevered. They followed the guiding light. They followed the star. They persevered. They got to Jerusalem. It took them months to get there. We don't know exactly how long, but they finally got there, and they got to Jerusalem. Did they find the baby? Not in Jerusalem, no. They came to King Herod, and they said, "Where is the new king?" King Herod was, it says, disturbed, but he was horrified. He was angry. He was enraged. He wanted to know who was trying to overthrow him. The wise men, though, they persevered. They went on. They could have quit at that moment, but they went on to Bethlehem to find. And it says the star rose, and they continued to follow Jesus. Jesus himself, Hebrews is telling us, he persevered. He endured the cross. When you think of all the things that Jesus Christ went through, we look at the communion table. We see the bread that represents his broken body. We see the cup which represents his shed blood on the cross. And we know that Jesus Christ gave his all. He persevered. He endured the ridicule, the scorn, the crown of thorns, the piercing of his side, the flogging, all of those things so that we might have life. He persevered. The second thing that the author of Hebrews tells us, he tells us to fix our eyes on Jesus. Fix our eyes on Jesus. What do you have your eyes on this year? What do you focus your life around? As I look back, I realize that I use the word focus a lot. Focus our hearts on worship. Focus. You probably hear me say that a lot, almost every week. But truly, that is such a key part of being a Christian, that we need to focus on Jesus Christ. The author says he is the author and perfecter of our faith. Is one of your goals to grow in your faith? Do you do that through reading other authors, through listening to famous television evangelists, or picking up books by famous writers? I know many of us have done Beth Moore studies, and we think she's wonderful, and some of you like Andy Stanley, or, many of you come to me with other names that you like to study. But there is no substitute for Jesus Christ in our lives. To spend time one-on-one with Jesus. You can study Bible studies and you can study great books and authors, but if you don't spend time with Jesus, you are not going to grow closer. Prayer, 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 and more prayer. Personal conversations, time alone meditating with Jesus Christ. Time spent with Jesus. You know, when the wise men came to Bethlehem, they didn't seek out anybody else. They didn't go to say Mary, the favored one. They didn't go to see the angels, or they came to see Jesus. They came to worship Jesus. They came to bring gifts to Jesus. They could have left him for King Herod. He was a man of power. He was a man of authority. Wouldn't it have been a good idea to bring those gifts to him and to gain favor with King Herod? No. They were seeking Jesus, because it is only Jesus who is the author and perfecter of our faith. The third thing that Hebrews tells us is that Jesus endured opposition. He endured the cross. And I believe that the closer you get to Jesus, the more opposition you will face. The more you get in step with Jesus Christ and his values and his outlook on the world, the more this world will oppose you. Even your own family and friends will try to lead you astray, will try to direct you towards other activities. A family member came to me a few months ago from one of the families, and someone said to me, well, my spouse says that they've had enough church. They're over-churched. You know what? Then it's time for the spouse to come to church alone. And I never recommend that, but when your family and your friends try to direct you in other directions, away from the church, away from Christ, that's the wrong direction. Jesus is the light of the world. He is the center of our world and should be. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and its righteousness. We will endure opposition. We will, from well-meaning people. Herod, really kicked up a fuss, a fight, and he headed up the opposition to the Christ child. If you read the rest of the chapter in the story, you know that King Herod sent out men to Bethlehem and to the vicinity to kill all of the boys 2 years and under. And scholars estimate that was as many as 20 to 30 small children, small boys that were killed in that neighborhood in Bethlehem. And I can't help but think when I read that story of the persistent evil that exists in our society. There is opposition, there is evil, there is violence that continues on and on and on. And Bethlehem was never the same. I'm sure just as the people of Newtown, Connecticut have had their lives drastically changed, the people of Bethlehem of that day and age were never the same. We are called to endure opposition, and sometimes it comes in very violent ways. The final word from the author of Hebrews tells us that we are not to grow weary and lose heart. That's my favorite verse, and it's a favorite verse, I guess, for me that I need to always hear. I don't know about you, but between Christmas and New Year's is always a time of year. Maybe it's because I'm always on vacation during that time, and my family always comes in. I don't know why, but it's always a time of year that I just feel tired. I feel weary. And these words in Hebrews really spoke to me. It says, let us not grow weary and lose heart. I think if I were to confess to you one of my biggest sins, it's that I grow weary. I grow weary. Weary means, I looked it up, it says tired, exhausted, and fatigued. And I thought, amen. You ever feel like that? Especially at the end of the year? Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's at the end of the year I just like, it's another end of the year. And I think, what can I do differently? You know, I get worried by all kinds of things. I get worried by my family, by my friends. I get worried by my job. I get worried by pettiness, by silliness. I get worried by stupidity. I get worried by, you name it. Fatigue, exhaustion. Am I making you feel tired? Just take a big sigh like that. Go. But what do we do to get out of that? How do we get out of that treadmill feeling that we're like the hamster on the treadmill, just running, and the life is so fast, and it's 2012, and it's going to be 2013, and then it's going to be 2014, and the Mayans weren't right, and what are we going to do? We're going to look to Jesus. We're going to look to Jesus. Because he is the one that can give us new life, that can refresh us, re-energize us. He is the author and perfecter of our faith. He calls us to run the race that's set before us with perseverance. Is it health that makes you weary? Are you always tired of getting up and hurting? Is it your job that makes you weary? Is there coworkers there that just drive you literally crazy, that you want to pull your hair out? Is it your family? Come on, let's confess. We all have dysfunctional families, don't we? I haven't found a normal one yet. I've been in ministry for 37 years. Well, that sounds so mean. But honestly, none of us are normal. I've come to that conclusion. What is normal? God is the author and perfecter of our faith. And when we look to Jesus, he can help us break that cycle. Break that feeling of hopelessness. Break that feeling. He leadeth me, O blessed thought. I don't know about you, but every time I sang that today, I sang it earlier and I sang it today, every time I almost got tears in my eyes because I thought, you know, if I would really take that seriously, if I would really allow him to lead me, wow. What would life be like? Instead of struggling through seminary like I did, I would have been finished and completed if I had listened to his voice. How many times in our lives did we not listen? The wise men, you know, I know they got weary. I know they had to be exhausted. When I think about that trip, the caravans, they had to ride camels. Think about that. How many of you have ever been on a camel? It is not comfortable. They rode them for months. They camped through the desert. How many of you ever camped in the sand? Oh, it's awful. How many of you think about the long nights they had, the dangers that they faced? One of the most common violences at that day was raiders who came and raided the caravans. And they were traveling in very dangerous conditions. They came and they were exhausted and they didn't find the baby. Why didn't they give up? They didn't give up because the star rose again. The star rose, it says, and they followed it to Bethlehem. When you are at your lowest, when you are weary, when you are exhausted, that's when it's time to look again to the light. To look to Jesus and say, Jesus, if ever I've needed you, I need you now. Because he is the only true guiding light. Would you pray with me?